I'm not a big fan of achievements in games. It's not that I think developers should never have achievements in games, and I don't judge anyone for wanting achievements in games, but I do think that in some cases achievements have the potential to significantly reduce the intrinsic enjoyments that players can get from a game. In this video, I'm going to state my case against achievements, and we'll start off by talking about one of my all-time favorite games. I, like many other people, love Kerbal Space Program. If you're watching this video, chances are you've already played KSP, or at least you know what it is. If you don't, pause the video and wishlist it. Just trust me on this one. It has over 77,000 reviews on Steam, of which 94% is positive. Once you start reading through these reviews, you realize how much time players are putting into the game. It's extremely common for players to have hundreds or even thousands of hours in Kerbal Space Program. Even a decade after the original beta release, KSP still has an active community and player base. This is the sort of thing that you would expect to see in a really successful multiplayer game, but it is quite rare for a single-player sandbox experience. So why does this game have such a huge following? I want to get some of the obvious points out of the way. Yes, there's no getting away from the fact that at the time it was just a really unique premise for a game. A sandbox where you can build and fly your own rockets based on realistic spaceflight physics and orbital mechanics. Since we're now in an era where nerdy stuff is cool, you could argue that executing well on this premise alone was enough for the game to be successful. But Kerbal Space Program wasn't just successful, it was massively successful with over 5 million copies sold, and the kind of following that most developers would love to have. I want to discuss one of the less obvious reasons that KSP has seen such long-term success. This is also one of the reasons why myself and many other players are still coming back to this game years after its release. The less obvious reason that I'm talking about is the fact that Kerbal Space Program doesn't have Steam achievements. Now, before you go into the comments to tell me why I'm wrong and why you disagree with me, just give me a few minutes to explain. I vividly remember my first time playing Kerbal Space Program. Traveling to other celestial objects seemed insane to me at the start, considering that I was having trouble just putting a rocket into orbit. I'll also never forget the first time I did a moon landing in KSP. In the last decade, I can't think of any other experience that I've had in gaming that felt more intrinsically rewarding. It wasn't just the landing itself that felt rewarding though. Every step along the way, from building my first rocket to touching down on the surface of Kerbin's moon, had me completely immersed in the experience. Kerbal Space Program doesn't need achievements because it's rewarding by design. The open-ended nature of the game means that the learning and exploration that you go through is nearly limitless. That married to the fact that this is a game that is not easy or forgiving in any way. It is challenging and failure comes fast and frequently. But it's important to note that failure is not frustrating. In the sandbox version of the game, it's actively encouraged also by design. It's often hilarious, and with every failure, the player learns something new. This is a game that gives the player basically three things: a strong sense of, first of all, purpose, secondly, autonomy, and thirdly, mastery. Introducing achievements has the potential to undermine all three of these qualities that I've just mentioned. Instead of further rambling on and waxing lyrical about my love for Kerbal Space Program, let's look at what the science says about the impact of extrinsic rewards. That's right, if this channel isn't nerdy enough already, it's about to get a bit educational. I want to talk about a book written by psychologist Daniel H. Pink. The next few minutes of this video is heavily based on his book, which I would highly recommend reading. I'll link it in the description below. So let's first talk about what intrinsic and extrinsic motivation is. Intrinsic motivation refers to doing something for the inherent satisfaction of the activity. You are deriving pleasure from the activity itself, not from some separate consequence of doing that activity. Extrinsic motivation, on the other hand, refers to behavior driven by external rewards. In other words, doing something because you'll receive something tangible or intangible, some sort of reward such as praise, money, things like that. Both of these can be effective motivators, but generally intrinsic motivation is considered to be a lot more effective. Intrinsic motivation endures, it's great for creativity, and it's generally effective at getting people into a state of flow to do work that is meaningful and fulfilling. All of this generally translates into good short-term and long-term outcomes, where the means is an end in itself because the activity is inherently satisfying. Extrinsic motivation, on the other hand, has a lot of downsides. It can be effective in the short term, but its effectiveness generally wanes over time. Extrinsic motivation also tends to be poorly suited to complex problem solving, given that it tends to undermine things like creativity. The worst thing, however, about utilizing extrinsic motivation through external rewards is how it relates to intrinsic motivation. Excessive external rewards can destroy intrinsic motivation. For example, if I started paying you increasingly large sums of money to do an activity that you inherently enjoy, I'll start eroding the pleasure that you get from that activity over time. Eventually, if I then stopped paying you completely, you may have lost all internal drive for that particular activity or similar activities because the reward system in your brain has effectively been rewired. This brings me to the crux of why I don't like achievements in games and why I'm glad that Kerbal Space Program doesn't have them. If Kerbal Space Program had achievements, there would be a significant part of the player base that would specifically try to unlock these achievements. That means less creativity in terms of setting goals and challenges for yourself and potentially taking shortcuts to get these achievements in the fastest and easiest way. It really goes against the fundamental design of a sandbox game. The worst part is that once you've unlocked all the achievements, everything else in the game will feel less meaningful. I've set countless goals for myself in Kerbal Space Program, from getting to orbit, landing on moons and planets, building jets, building rocket trains, the list goes on. With all of these goals, I've enjoyed the journey as much as the destination. Perhaps I've even enjoyed the journey more. And that's the point. I don't think I would have enjoyed it as much if the game arbitrarily told me that some achievements are more meaningful by having a notification pop up in the corner of my screen to tell me that I've done something right. More than that, I don't think I would hold it forever in my memory as one of the best gaming experiences I've ever had. Before I wrap up, I want to introduce some nuance to this argument by saying that I don't think that Steam achievements are always a bad thing. I can see how games that were designed for a single playthrough with a more linear approach to problem solving could benefit from them. I can also completely understand how some players would enjoy that, and I respect that. It's just not for me. I'd love to hear other people's opinions on this though. Let me know in the comments what your thoughts are on Steam achievements, and as always, if you like this content and would like to see more, do like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.